She didn't run at first. She just stood there, on a balcony high above Rome, the kind of balcony built for gods, not people. Her name was Livia, daughter of an emperor, raised inside marble. She was 23 years old, and she had never once believed that anything she loved could disappear. Tonight, she was learning otherwise. Below her, the city was breaking apart, not slowly, not quietly, but all at once, the way a rope snaps when you've been pulling on it for too long without noticing the fraying. A bell rang somewhere in the dark, then another, then another. Not church bells, warning bells. People poured into the streets like water escaping a broken jar, shouting, tripping, calling names no one answered. A woman clutched a child against her chest and ran with her eyes forward, never looking back, as if looking back might make it real. And then came the fire. Not one fire, many. On the edge of the city, first, like Rome was bleeding light into the night sky. Livia gripped the stone railing and watched the orange glow pulse and spread. She could smell it from up here. Smoke and cedar and something older, something she couldn't name. The smell of things that were never supposed to burn. Behind her, the palace was silent. Too silent. That silence felt worse than the fire. She had grown up inside those halls. She knew every echo, every corridor, every face that passed through the grand doors. But tonight the halls were empty. Or worse, they weren't empty, and whatever was moving through them wasn't moving toward her. She was born into the greatest empire on earth and lived long enough to watch it die. That truth arrived without ceremony, the way truths often do. Empires don't always collapse loudly. Sometimes they just stop holding together. But Rome did not fall in a single night. Livia was born inside silence. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of certainty. Marble halls that never felt cold, only endless. Colonnades that stretched so far you lost count of the columns. Gardens where the fountains never stopped. She used to believe all homes were like this. She was 4 years old when she first watched a Roman parade from her father's shoulder. The legions moved through the streets below like a single living thing, thousands of boots striking stone in perfect unison, armor catching sunlight the way water catches fire. She remembered reaching her small hand toward them as if she could touch the sound. "What are you doing, little one?" her father asked. "I want to hold the music," she told him. He laughed harder at that, and she had felt, in that moment, that she was the safest person alive. Emperor Flavius Cornelius ruled from a chamber so vast that the walls seemed to breathe. He was not a warm man, not to senators, not to generals, not to the world. But to Livia, he was simply her father. A man who smelled of leather and sandalwood, and who called her his little philosopher when she asked too many questions at dinner. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands still. She watched him hold a room once without saying a single word. 50 men in togas, all of them senators, all of them waiting on one breath. She was 9. She thought that was what all fathers were like. She grew up walking beside men who whispered. She watched parades that stretched the length of entire streets. She attended ceremonies where priests burned cedar oil and spoke of Rome as if it were a god itself. Not a city, not a government, but something divine, eternal. One evening she sat on the steps outside the Senate and asked an old guard how long Rome would last. He smiled at her the way adults smile at children who ask unanswerable questions. "Forever," he said. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? There's a strange comfort in believing something too big to fail. It removes fear. It replaces doubt with something softer. Trust. She didn't know then what she would understand too late. That empires don't die when people expect it. They die when people stop expecting it at all. She was 14 the first time she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. It was late. The palace corridors had that hollow sound they only get after midnight. Footsteps carrying farther than they should. Voices leaking under doors. Livia had been walking back from the library, a scroll tucked under her arm, when she heard 2 senators speaking in the passage near the eastern garden. She didn't stop. She slowed. "The grain shipment from Egypt won't arrive. The portmaster has already been paid to look the other way." "And the general?" "He knows. He wants his share before winter." She kept walking. But something had shifted inside her, like a tile loosened from a mosaic. Small, barely visible. But once you knew it was there, you couldn't stop looking. In the years that followed, she looked more carefully at everything. She looked at the Senate, those marble benches, those men in white who had always seemed so confident. And she saw something different now. They spoke less like leaders and more like merchants. Names traded, favors calculated, fear running beneath every sentence like a current beneath still water. She looked at the soldiers who guarded the palace gates, men who had once carried themselves like Rome's beating heart, and she saw the exhaustion in their faces. Men stationed here for 3 years without rotation, without adequate pay, without certainty about what they were protecting. She looked at the roads leading into the city, and she saw refugees walking in from the east. Not soldiers, not traders. Families. Carrying their children and whatever they could hold. She asked one woman where she'd come from. "The village past the 3rd fortress," the woman said. "There's nothing left there now." Taxes rose, not to build, not to add a new aqueduct or a new road, but simply to keep paying armies that were growing less loyal each year. She heard men in the palace call the farmers lazy, but she had seen the empty baskets. She had seen the cracked earth. Lazy was not the word. One evening she found her father alone in his study, staring at a map. She had never seen him look at a map with uncertainty before. Maps were always things he commanded. Tonight he simply looked at it, the way you look at something you used to understand. "Father," she said, "are we going to be all right?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. That smile adults use when they want to protect children from answers. "Rome has always been all right," he said. She heard the past tense. She didn't say anything. Beauty can hide decay, and power can delay collapse. It cannot prevent it. Once you see cracks in marble, you stop trusting the surface. The year Livia turned 17, her father was gone. Not from illness, not from battle, from a whisper, that particular kind of whisper that, in Rome, traveled faster than armies and cut deeper than swords. 3 men she had seen at dinner. 3 conversations she had never been allowed to hear the end of. And then, before the month was out, her father's name was being spoken in the palace the way you speak a name that belongs to someone who is no longer safe to protect. She was given 2 days to leave the imperial apartments. A guard, one she recognized, one who had once brought her fruit when she was sick as a child, would not meet her eyes when he handed her the order. That was the moment she understood. It was not her father's enemies who had destroyed him. It was the men who had called themselves his friends. What followed was the season of emperors. She watched them come and go the way a river watches debris pass, some fast, some slow, all of them eventually gone. One emperor lasted 9 months before a general decided he had been patient long enough. Another lasted barely 6 weeks. He reportedly renamed 3 gods after himself in that time. Whether true or simply a story people told to explain why he deserved what happened, Livia was never sure. Truth had become unreliable in Rome. It bent toward whoever needed it most. She lived in a smaller house now, near the old Forum, a place offered by a distant cousin who owed her father a debt and was wise enough to know that debts outlast the people who hold them. At formal dinners, she still watched the new emperors perform. They were not stupid men. That was what frightened her. They were calculating men. Men who smiled at dinner and ordered executions before breakfast. Men who kept their friends close and then, when close became threatening, found ways to reclassify them as enemies. At one banquet, gold plates, wine that never seemed to run low, music that played without stopping. She watched a senator laugh too loudly at something the emperor had said. The laugh was half a second too long. She saw 2 other men notice this. She saw them recalibrate their own expressions in real time. Luxury, in this Rome, was fear wearing perfume. The throne was no longer a seat of power. It was an exposure, a target. She stood near it once. It was empty, between reigns, and looked at it for a long time. It was just stone and wood and gold leaf, and yet men were killing each other to sit in it, even knowing what sitting in it meant. If everyone who sits there disappears, who is it really for? The silence answered her. Rome was no longer ruled. It was being passed around, like something no one wanted to hold for too long. She first heard the name in the market, not in the palace, not from a general's report, but from a bread seller who had a cousin who had a friend in the northern garrison. The name was passed between people the way terrible news always travels, sideways, in pieces, with a kind of forced casualness that doesn't quite hide the shaking underneath. Visigoths. How close? She asked the bread seller. The man shrugged. Closer than last month. That was how Rome's danger arrived. Not as a declaration, not as a battle cry, but as a direction. A compass point. North. Closer than last month. Closer than anyone was ready to admit out loud. She had heard of Germanic tribes her whole life. Rome had fought them, traded with them, hired them, feared them, sometimes all at once. But this felt different. Something in the way soldiers were moving, or not moving, told her so. She watched a cohort march through the city one morning. She had spent her whole life watching Roman soldiers march. She knew the sound. She knew the rhythm. What she saw that morning was still disciplined, still precise. But the eyes were wrong. The eyes of men who know where they're going look like certainty. These eyes looked like calculation. The frontier was collapsing. Not everywhere at once, but in pieces. A fortress held for years would fall in a matter of days. Reports came in describing retreats that were called tactical repositioning in official language, and something much simpler in the faces of the men delivering them. And then the refugees came. Families, mostly. Women and old men and children who'd been ahead of whatever was moving south. They carried the things people always carry when they have to choose. The smallest children, the lightest food, one object from home that couldn't be left behind. She saw a girl, perhaps 9 years old, sitting on the steps of a temple near the forum, not crying, just staring at the stones beneath her feet with the particular stillness of a child who has run out of reactions. Livia sat down beside her. She didn't say anything. She didn't have anything useful to say. She just sat there until the girl's mother came back, and the girl stood up and followed without looking back. Inside the palace, the generals argued. We pushed them back at the Danube. With what forces? The Eastern legions. The Eastern legions are suppressing an uprising in 3 provinces. Then we negotiate. We already negotiated. She heard these reports secondhand. She heard the pauses between words. She heard what wasn't said. Empires don't fall when enemies arrive at the gate. They fall when enemies arrive faster than the empire can respond. And the empire is too busy arguing about itself to notice the difference. There was a general named Marcus Aurelius Drusus. She had met him twice, once at a formal dinner when she was still living in the palace, once in a corridor years later when she was nobody and he was everything. He had a quality she had noticed in men who were about to make a very large, very irreversible decision. He was unusually calm, the calm of someone who has already decided. When Drusus crossed the Tiber with his legions, he crossed it in the direction of Rome, not the enemy. He did not announce rebellion. He announced salvation. His soldiers were not invaders. They were, in his words, the cure for the disease that had infected the throne. Another general answered him within a fortnight, then a third, each one declaring loyalty to Rome, each one meaning loyalty to himself. She stood on the roof of her house one evening and watched torchlight moving in the hills south of the city. Those were Roman soldiers moving in the dark toward other Roman soldiers. The empire was fighting itself. She had asked an old senator once, a man who had survived more changes of power than she had years, how this was possible. He had looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because each side believes it is the real Rome, he said, and by the time they've finished proving it, there isn't enough left to matter. The treasury was running dry. She knew this not because anyone told her. No one told her anything official anymore, but because of what she saw, the quality of the coins changing, the weight of them in the hand, lighter than they used to be. The cost of bread rising not weekly, but daily. One afternoon she passed a wall near the old forum where someone had scraped away a painted image of the current emperor's face. They hadn't replaced it with anything, just taken it down. That absence felt more significant than any protest speech she had ever heard. People were not angry anymore. Anger requires some belief that things could be different. What she saw in the streets now was something heavier. Resignation. A soldier she had known for years, a man named Severus, who had guarded the palace entrance for a decade, found her one morning near the market. He looked older than she remembered. I'm leaving, he told her. Going north. My family is there. What about your post? She asked. He looked at her with an expression she would not forget. Not guilt, not fear. Something quieter than both. We don't know who we're fighting for anymore, he said, and I'd rather know who I'm going home to. She watched him walk away into the crowd, and she understood then that it wasn't the armies outside the walls that were destroying Rome. It was the armies inside the walls that had already stopped believing. She didn't hear the gates fall. She felt it, like something inside the city finally giving up, a collective exhale, the last breath of something that had been holding on longer than it should. Rome did not end with silence. It ended with noise. Fire found the streets first. Not one flame, but many, scattered and scattered again, as if the city was being lit from the inside. This moved with intention. She ran, not as a princess, not as the emperor's daughter, just a person moving through smoke, following the pull of open space, trying to stay ahead of heat. The streets she had known her whole life looked wrong in the orange light. Familiar shapes turned strange, like words you've said too many times until they stop making sense. She turned a corner and nearly fell over a man sitting in the middle of the road, holding a small bronze figure in both hands. A household god. Something his grandfather had owned, perhaps. He was just sitting there, not moving, as if the god might tell him where to go. "Get up," she said. "You have to move." He looked up at her. She didn't know what he saw in her face, but it was enough. He stood. He put the bronze figure inside his robe. He ran. She kept moving. Marble cracked somewhere behind her, a sound like a giant clearing its throat, followed by the deep percussion of something massive meeting the ground. She didn't look back. Looking back, she had learned, was how you lost time you didn't have. She passed a temple. She had been brought here as a child. She remembered the smell of incense, the cool stone under her bare feet in summer, a priest who had given her a small clay tablet with her name pressed into it in neat letters. Now the portico was on fire from the inside. She stopped, just for a moment, just long enough to understand. This was the city she had been told would outlast everything. She had spent 23 years being shaped by that belief, measuring herself against it, finding her identity in it. And it was burning. Not because it was weak, not because it deserved to, but because things built by human hands are held together by human will. And the will had been running out for a very long time. The empire she was told would last forever died in smoke and ash. She kept moving. There was nothing left to save, only something left to survive. She did not look like an emperor's daughter anymore. Time takes these things quietly, not all at once, no dramatic transformation, no single moment of before and after. Just the slow accumulation of years lived differently than expected. She was in her 40s now. She lived in a village 2 days' walk from the city that had been Rome. A small house, a garden that needed more attention than she gave it. Neighbors who knew her only as the woman who sometimes sat on the hillside in the evenings and looked south. She sat there now. The ruins were not visible from here, but she knew the direction. She always knew the direction. There is something about the place that formed you, even when it no longer exists as you knew it. Your body still knows where it was, still orients toward it. The way a plant grows toward where the light used to come from. She had spent a long time being angry, then a long time being sad, then a long time being neither, just present, just watching the particular quality of light in the late afternoon and trying to understand what she was supposed to do with what she had witnessed. She had seen an empire end, not in theory, not in a book, in smoke and fire and the faces of people she had known. She had seen what collapse actually looked like. Not the dramatic version, not the single catastrophic moment that history books prefer. The real version. The real version was slower. It started with small betrayals that everyone tolerated because confronting them was inconvenient. It continued with large betrayals that everyone normalized because the small ones had already lowered the standard of what was acceptable. Greed, corruption, arrogance, division. She had heard those words her whole life, in speeches, in histories, in the pronouncements of men who used them to describe other men, other ages, other places, as if these were exotic diseases that came from somewhere else, as if they couldn't grow in the very soil you were standing on, in the very institutions you had been raised to trust. She picked up a stone from the ground beside her. Rough, unremarkable, nothing like the marble she had grown up touching, but solid, real, the kind of thing that would be here long after she wasn't. She turned it in her hand. The question she kept returning to was not when Rome had fallen. She knew when. The question was when Rome had stopped being Rome, when the shape was still there but the substance inside had quietly hollowed out. She thought it happened not in a throne room or on a battlefield, but in 10,000 small moments spread across decades, when someone who knew better chose comfort over truth. She thought about the guard who had smiled at her when she was a child and told her Rome would last forever. She did not blame him. He had believed it. And belief in permanence is seductive precisely because the alternative requires you to take responsibility for what comes next. The sun was going down over the hills to the west. She stayed until the light changed, until the gold became orange, became gray, and then she stood, brushed the grass from her skirt, and walked back toward the house where a lamp was already burning. Empires rarely fall because enemies break their walls. They fall because they forget what built them. She had forgotten nothing, and she understood now that remembering, truly remembering, not the comfortable version, not the version that makes the past feel safely distant, was perhaps the only thing a person could offer to whatever came next. Not to save it. She had stopped believing in saving things. Just to make sure it understood what it was walking into.